how I got to New York, right? I mean, Austria is not, let's say, a very big country, right? So I'm not sure how many have know Austria. It's usually a country that, yeah, when Americans come to Europe, you would skip it, right? You would go from Munich right to Italy and maybe cross Austria, maybe go to Vienna. But so for me, my dream was always to go out and to explore the world. So I wanted to go out, and New York is, I think, for me, it was the place to be, right? Coming from a small country, I wanted to go to the best city in the world, I think. And I applied for internships after my law school, and there was this global policy forum, and they only had unpaid internships, which, by the way, I find is really a bad thing to do, like be it the United Nations or non-profits, there should be no unpaid internships, right? I think that's really a no-go. They should be paid because, yeah, it should be paid work. So anyway, they had unpaid internships, and I really wanted to go there because they did incredible work on non-profits and the United Nations. So I applied, and there were 60 applications from around the world, and they had 4 unpaid internship positions. And I was lucky enough to get one of these unpaid internship positions in New York. And to be honest, it was only possible because my parents paid for me, right? Which I find is one of these things that I really hate with the system right now, that it doesn't support people from all classes, from other societies. I think it's a kind of discrimination that, yeah, that already at that time it bothered me. But anyway, I went to New York, and I worked there for free. I did an amazing job. I worked with the United Nations. I could talk to ambassadors. I met people from the Security Council. We had informal meetings with ambassadors from China. It was really great. Imagine, I was 25. I had no money, but I was in New York, and I lived the dream of my life, right? To be in New York. And I met this one woman from the Hague Appeal for Peace, and she asked me if I had time to do more unpaid work, right? So I had basically a full-time unpaid internship position, and I started to do small jobs for this other woman who had her own foundation and who led this organization called Hague Appeal for Peace. So I did small researches, I wrote small papers for her, and I think it was in April, my internship position came to an end. And I met Cora, that was her name. I met this lady in the elevator one day, and we talked a little bit. And I said, you know, I'm really sorry because my visa runs out and my position will come to an end, and I don't want to go back to Austria, I want to stay. And at that moment, she looked at me and she said, I might have a job for you. Why don't you come and see me at 2 p.m. in the 12th floor? And basically, this is how I got my first paid position in international relations. And this story, I think, just for me, simplifies how you get jobs, right? And how you maybe at one point end up being the chief executive director of an amazing organization, is not because you had a plan, but because you were there and you asked the right questions, and then there was luck and the right person who gave you the opportunity. And I think for me, that pretty much sums up my life. I was always curious. I was always interested. I was there when somebody was needed to do work, and I just put myself out there. And I think one thing led to the other. And now I'm very happy. I'm now 44 years old. I have a family. I have 2 kids, aged 8 and 5. I have a part-time position as a chief executive director, and yeah, I think I really have my dream job, and I'm happy I'm here. Yeah, so much for the first intro.
Awesome, thank you. So Anne, I just think it's really interesting, and you already talked about it a little bit, but that how you just kind of have to leave yourself open. Like you said, you have no plan. You just go with it. And when a door presents itself, you just take it. So I think that's really probably the best advice for all of you. Just jump, you know, when you see it. So I was going to ask you about your transition from Global Policy Forum. Actually, from Global Policy Forum, what was though the process of? Was it very competitive? I would imagine it's very competitive. And you know, how did you get that job? Well, it wasn't a job, it was an internship.
unpaid internship.
Right.
Yes, there it was competitive. I mean, I did, as I said, I did my law studies here in Austria, and I specialized in how nonprofit organizations work together with the United Nations. So I did research which really fit to this organization that I applied for. So I think I was really in their area of expertise, and I wrote my thesis already in English, which for an Austrian student wasn't so obvious. And I think that was it. I mean, I really specialized in one area, which was very, yeah, I think, and it was the right fit for this organization. Otherwise, I think it was just pure luck, really.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, as you know, I have a similar experience with the Committee on Disarmament. Okay, so I'm going to open this up to you guys. You guys have any questions for Anne? Don't be shy.
I have a question that I emailed you the other day.
Sure.
Yeah, so my thesis last semester was about national and global reproductive rights of women and like the impact that that has on communities. So I just wanted to ask you how you handle the violation and implementation of reproductive rights in countries that have like corrupt governments and don't really have the means to support the reproductive rights for their people.
Yeah. I mean, maybe 2 sentences about Amnesty International. So just that you understand how we work. We are one section of Amnesty. So Amnesty International, the main headquarters sits in London. It's called the International Secretariat, and we are a federation of about 80 countries. And as a country, I'm independent. I mean, we are an independent organization with our own board and our own constituencies, but we are a member of the federation, and as part of the federation, we carry out global campaigns. So Amnesty around the world, as you know, we focus on human rights. Our vision is all human rights for everybody, everywhere, which is a very broad vision. So basically, but women's rights is really one of the core topics of Amnesty International. And since I joined, for example, like 4 years ago, we've seen tremendous progress made. For example, in Ireland, where the access to abortion and also the focus on reproductive rights was finally granted. I think how we work as Amnesty is really with the human rights lens. We do research, we carry out research about human rights violations everywhere in the world, and then we do global campaigns. Today, for example, I got an email from our section in Poland. So currently Poland faces really a setback on reproductive rights and access to health and also access to abortion. So at the moment, we try to help our colleagues like in Amnesty Poland to really increase pressure on the government to grant women their reproductive rights. These campaigns take a long time, so change only comes after many, many years of campaigning. But the good thing with Amnesty is it's global, and we have 8 million supporters. So when we throw in our whole weight, usually it has a success. But what we've seen, maybe to sum it up, is that human rights as a framework in the recent years has really seen a backdrop. So governments that were supporters of human rights, like Austria. Austria was a huge human rights supporter at the government of Austria in the past. Really, what we see in the last years is that human rights are not a framework anymore that everybody accepts. So even our own government here in Austria, they're now very conservative and also towards the right. So just 1.5 years ago, we had a right-wing government. And basically they said that human rights should not be for everyone. They wanted to basically cancel the right to asylum. So what we see now, I think also in the US, but everywhere in Europe, is a decrease in the human rights sector, which is really worrying.
And actually, yes, and thank you, Anne. Can you add maybe some insight, if you have? I've just kind of noticed, I think that when you and I were both at the UN, the responsibility to protect, or R2P, was an important narrative. And I've kind of seen a retraction of that. Is that kind of what you're getting to, is just governments have become more conservative?
Yeah, and I think governments are becoming more nationalist.
More nationalist, and so
yeah,
I've kind of seen that the R2P has just kind of gone out the window. We don't hear about it anymore.
The right to privacy, you mean? Sorry, I didn't understand you, Marty.
I just haven't. You know, it used to be a major part of the global narrative, and I just don't hear that anymore.
Yeah, I can underline that.
Marty, are you talking about responsibility to protect or right to privacy?
Responsibility to protect.
Yeah.
Responsibility to protect, yeah. Could be two things. Now we talk a lot about privacy. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we've all seen the narrative shifting. So we work a lot on narratives and framing, and what we see is that governments really drift right, and it's a nationalist right-wing narrative. It's about rights for citizens and not rights for everyone. So here our government talked about, yeah, of course, Austrians should have all human rights, but meaning that people without an Austrian nationality should not have rights. So it's a divisive frame. It's a frame of hate and division and segregation of groups. We call it the narrative of demonization. So politicians really use the us versus them narrative to really separate groups and then just play them out. I mean, it's everywhere.
Okay.
From China to Brazil to Austria.
There's a few questions in the chat, by the way.
I see that. Should I address them? I would love it.
I just saw them too. Sure, go ahead.
So my day-to-day duties in my current position. That's the one I like. I think what I like in my job is I was never really an expert. So I know now working in Amnesty, everybody thinks I'm a human rights expert. I'm not. I can just, bullshit my way around, to be very honest. But I consider myself a general manager. What I really like is no day looks like the other. So there's no routine in my job. Usually I come in with 3 priorities, and by 10 a.m. I have 3 other priorities. Because Amnesty is very reactive. So when our government says, they want to close the borders and not grant asylum anymore, we tend to react within a day. So we really shift around our priorities, which is fun on the other hand, on the one side, but really difficult on the other. So my days look like, okay, I could give an interview at 10, and then I meet a major donor at 11. I have a staff meeting. I meet, for example, also with my volunteers. Here in Austria, we have only 43 paid staff, but about 1,000 volunteers and active members. So I talk to them, they come in, they have meetings with me. And usually I go home at 3 p.m. to pick up my kids. I like to emphasize that because usually, people tend to believe that when you are a CEO, you have a 60 hours plus week. I decided I won't do that. So I'm a working mom, and my luck, what's really good at Amnesty here is it's a top job sharing. So it's a shared leadership position. We're 2 women sharing 1 director's position, each of us working 30 hours a week. So I can both have, time with my kids and my family and still have a top job. I can really encourage everybody to do that. It's fantastic. So yeah, that's about my day-to-day duties.
Okay. Hamilton and Esther also asked that they'd like to hear about your transition. Where was this?
From my first job.
Yeah. I think you talked about that a little bit. I mean, the transition to Global Policy Forum, right? And then.
Yeah, and then maybe, I think I did all kinds of jobs in the meantime. I mean, I worked in factories to finance my studies. I babysat. I translated from German into French and English. I did service. I mean, really, I did all kinds of jobs. I worked at McDonald's. That was the worst job. But as my first professional job, that was really in New York. And after New York, when I did my studies in England, I came back to Austria and I applied for a job really from a newspaper. So there was a newspaper advertisement. They were looking for a child rights advocate for this child rights organization, and I applied, and I think they had 150 applications, and I got the job. You never know how and why. At that point, I really didn't know anybody in this organization. I just came back from, almost 3 years of studying and living abroad. I had no connections in Austria, and still somehow yeah, it was a fit.
So I'm going to pick up on that, where Esther asks, how can you make yourself stand out? How can you make your application stand out? Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, so if you applied like for my organization, I wouldn't look at your grades. I would look at what you're really interested in. What is your motivation? Why do you want to make the world a better place? So where did you help out in your communities? What are your interests? What are your hobbies? I'm interested to know you as a person. I want to know what you did outside of your courses, of your studies. Even if you like lived abroad for a year, that could be super interesting. For me, it's not a lost year. It shows that you're interested in doing something else, right? But that's it. I mean, that's the nonprofit. I can't talk for like if you want to work for Goldman Sachs or some other big companies. I'm sure they look at your grades. But I think what I look at really is the heart and the motivation of people. And I want to know not if you're a specialist in one area, but can you really, can you innovate, and because the jobs that you will have, they're not out there yet. I'm sure you will all have jobs that are not defined yet. So you will all come up with your own jobs. And what we all need now in our area is people who can constantly innovate and improve what we're doing. So I don't want to know what you're good at now. I want you to improve my organization, and I want you to be smarter than I am, and to understand what organizations of tomorrow need, and not that you're good at doing what we do today. I think that's what I'm looking for.
Great.
Excuse me. May I ask a question?
Martinez, go ahead.
First off, thank you so much for speaking with us today. It's been an honor hearing about your story and everything that you've gone through and all of that great stuff. I was just wondering, as an employer and as someone who is in the nonprofit sector, what skills are you looking for in those? Like, I understand that you're looking for people who are passionate, who volunteer for things that they think are right, but what are the skills within those people that you're looking for?
Yeah, I have a range of jobs in my organization. So out of the 43 people, how many do you think are actually human rights experts? You might be surprised.
10%?
That's correct. I have 4 people with a human rights degree. So everybody else works on communication, social media, accounting, fundraising, major donors, IT. So whatever your skills are, just make sure you know what you're able to do, and just apply with the right motivation. I need IT experts. I need people with finance skills. I need people who are good at communicating with volunteers. I need people who can mobilize. When we have a demonstration, I need people who know where to pull the strings and how to organize a big demonstration. Okay. So the range, don't think it's not about only human rights. It's about organization, finance, everything that you can think about. Just make sure you're good at one of these areas.
Okay. Thank you.
Great.
I had a question real quick, kind of more towards the job side of things. When you're trying to be effective and do these campaigns, do you work more with like governments that are more willing to instill these human rights in different countries? So like, let's say America was super focused on human rights. Would you try and use them and their political power to help get human rights in Mauritania, Africa, for say? Or is it the 8 million different members that you have that really drives that home and helps that more?
I think Amnesty really shifted in the past years. Originally, we would work with favorable governments, just what you said. Our theory of change would be, okay, let's work with those that are willing, but more or less all the governments are now unwilling. So we focus on people power. So our new strategy focuses on people power, and our new theory of change is the more people demand for change, the more effective it is, and the more pressure we can put on governments. But it will have to be a hell load of people. So even now in Austria, we had a vote with like 700,000 people for women's rights, and the government didn't even like give it a discussion in parliament. And 700,000 people, I mean, we only have 8 million inhabitants, so 700,000 is quite a big crowd. The government didn't care.
Wow. And where do you go for recruiting, or where do you target? Are there specific areas you target, age groups that you target to start like recruiting might be the wrong word, but recruit,
mobilizing. No, we have our own, we have a lot of ideas, and money also goes into really understanding who our who our supporters can be. And now we identified 4 target groups that are more likely to support Amnesty. So one is the more urban young crowd, but then there are also the like 60 plus, age people who also have time to support Amnesty. So we really have, there's a lot of thinking about this in the organization. We don't just target anyone everywhere.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
So Jesse has a question here on the chat here that says, one could argue that the Syrian civil war has been one of the worst human rights atrocities in our generation. He was just curious about how Amnesty has played a part, and what has been, and what role has it been? Sorry, particularly with regard to Europe and the influx of refugees.
I mean, Austria played a key role in the refugee crisis in 2015, when Austria opened its borders, basically without registering all these refugees coming in, and basically letting them pass on to Germany and onwards to Sweden. Still now in Europe, Austria is one of the countries that took in the biggest part of refugees. But what we've seen as a consequence is a huge backlash and really a deterioration of the narrative. So what we see in Austria is, like in the States, a huge anti-refugee narrative. And I think it's part, and what's Amnesty role is, I think it's part of the government's narrative to say, there is this group of refugees and they take away your social benefits and your jobs, and they just played it out like full front. Amnesty, I think what we do is we try to really avoid the worst, but we are not very successful. I think the whole asylum, the whole legal framework for asylum is just it's faulty. You need to reinvent it. And as Amnesty, I think we lack a vision on not only on asylum but also on migration. I think we need to focus on migration. Is not a bad thing, right? Migration happens. And we need to have this vision that you just need to have a management of migration and of asylum. And it's not all bad. And I think what Amnesty lacks really is a broader discussion. And we are trying to have a policy and a paper on that, but it's really disputed also internally. It's a really difficult topic, and it will take another 10, 20, 30 years to really have an impact there, unfortunately. It's really bad. And we can only avoid the worst. Even in Austria, there are horrible, horrible things happening here in Austria as well.
Okay. Olivia asks that she notes that she works with the Office of International Rescue, the International Rescue Committee here in Colorado. And she was wondering if you could speak to the work of the country offices and possibly touch on how students can get involved in these offices or internships.
Here in Austria and at Amnesty, we don't offer internships. As I said, we only have paid positions because I'm completely against these unpaid internships.
Good, everybody. Hi. Sorry.
Yeah, I learned, yeah. But I know that like also all the UN offices, or like all the big non-profits, they really have a lot of unpaid internships positions out there. I'm not really sure I should encourage you to get in touch and look for these unpaid internships, but I know for sure that it helped me to get a paid job, so it's a bit difficult to suggest something.
Actually, through our university, we have grants that will give us stipends for unpaid internships.
Good.
That's a really new program to our university, especially within like liberal arts fields like this one. So we've
very good.
been able to pursue some unpaid internships because of
That's
that.
good.
as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can just encourage you to just, you know, write to the country offices directly. I mean, maybe one more suggestion. I'm on LinkedIn. You can also find my profile. I mean, I'm happy to connect with you, but also just go out there and hunt the people. I mean, write them. You don't need an introduction or anything. Just be smart about what you want. And most of the people are happy to receive a message. And if they can't really help you directly, they might just, you know somebody who needs an intern. I know from so many people who really found an internship or even a position like that. Send your resume, make friends, ask interesting questions, go to conferences. I don't know. It's the world is yours. I mean, and you have many more opportunities than I had 25 years ago.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. You just push it. Just, you know, go for it, and keep putting yourself out there. Jeff, what is your approach to, is your organization taking with regards to women's rights in the Middle East, or are you, in places like Afghanistan and Iraq?
You're really asking the tough questions.
Teacher.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also wearing one of my favorite Amnesty t-shirts. It says, "My body, my rights." That was a very successful campaign a couple of years ago, really emphasizing reproductive rights, but also just basic rights, the human rights of women. It's a main focus of Amnesty. We're trying to highlight it everywhere, wherever we can. But to be honest, it's tough in these countries. We don't have country offices in Afghanistan or Iraq. It's too dangerous for Amnesty staff to really be there permanently. Usually our researchers go there for a mission. Like when they evaluate a human rights violation, they would travel out of London or other places and research what happened there, and then go back and write the research, because it's too dangerous for permanent staff to be there. I don't have any, I mean, especially of like Afghanistan or Iraq, I don't have any good news to tell. It's a tough battle everywhere, and we try what we can.
Okay. And then I have Leslie. I'm going to kind of rephrase this, because this is also an interesting question to me about. She speaks about different ideologies. I would think about different cultures and how there's a backlash against refugees arriving in Europe, United States, and wherever. What's your actual question there?
Best techniques.
Asking, just to rephrase it, because every state has a different narrative, and even people within those states have different ideologies as well. How do states and different groups of people within and even outside, how do we come together to basically form a common ideology, but not really a common ideology, but just to view that other ideologies are okay, and not to form a us versus them. Yes.
Good question. I think we're all struggling with that. I think it's a key question for nonprofits like Amnesty to be effective in the future, is how do we bring people together, and how do we make people understand what human rights are? Because human rights is about a future for each one of us, right? It's not about human rights for the refugees or human rights for the women. It's human rights for you and for me and for my children and for your parents. And I think what's the beautiful thing now, and the chance now in times of COVID, is to break that message and say, now it's important to talk about human rights for everyone, because if the refugees aren't protected from the virus, we are not protected, right? Because the virus, it doesn't stop at the borders, and it doesn't stop between men and women. I think it's a beautiful moment, and I really think it gives me hope in a way to break that message. And for me, it all comes down to how do we communicate about human rights. And Amnesty, I think in the past was very much known, and also I think the reputation is there that we are experts in human rights, right? But these experts, the status of experts also involves that, let's say, people on the street, they don't listen to Amnesty because we're too far away. We talk about regulations and laws and norms. We need to communicate in very simple terms and say that your kids go to school and that you have health care. Okay, maybe in the States it's a different topic, yeah. But here we have, it's a social benefit. Everyone has health care. And that's a human right, that you can go to hospital here in Austria. It's a human right. And this is what we try to bring it down at Amnesty in the past 3 years, is we are experimenting a lot with hopeful communication. So we want to inspire people by telling them there's hope. Yes, the world is a grim place, but I mean, we improved so much in the last 100 years. There are no big wars anymore. Like child poverty has been reduced by 70%. You know, all these good things are happening, and you can be part of these good things. And so please join us. And the more, and you will join with so many other people who have the same ideas, because we all want to make this world a better place. So I think hopeful communication is great. Talking, like meeting people, like where are these spaces? Where can we bring people together? Also using social media. I think this whole internet needs to be democratized. We have the tools are at our fingertips, but we have to make a good use of them. So I'm excited about this, because all these techniques, they will help us in the future to bring people together and to also instill hope, because we all want hope. We don't want fear and anger. I think you can motivate and mobilize people with fear and anger, but it's more sustainable to motivate them through hope and empathy and solidarity.
And I got texted a question, so I'm gonna read that out. I'm gonna combine it with kind of another question. So the two questions together. One, it seems like there's a lot on your plate for Amnesty International. There's a lot on your plate. So how do you, part one of the question is, how do you triage that? You know, what is most important? How do we attack it most immediately? And I'm going to combine it with the second question is, in that whole process, how has COVID-19 affected your ability to carry out your work?
The first question is a brilliant question. Whoever can solve it, I will hire that person immediately.
Travis, you got a job.
So difficult. So I think just the vision of Amnesty, as I said, is we want to do everything everywhere for everyone, which means that the limited resources we have are spread very thin. And I think Amnesty really has tried to focus, you know, really, like, what are the 3 priorities for the next 4 years? So we really tried to come up with a few priorities, condense it, and say, and that's the way. And then something happens. Okay, I mean, as soon as we come up with a plan, something happens. So we had a beautiful strategy, like internationally set out for the next 5 years, then came COVID. So basically the whole strategy for Amnesty International, which had 2 main focus. So one was women's rights and the other one was the right to protest. Forget it. After COVID, everything will be different. So we can start from zero. So my question is, how can you respond quickly? So I want to talk about agility, you know, all these new ideas of how organizations should be more responsive. I don't want to talk about job descriptions that are written out, you know, beautifully defined job descriptions. I want to know what's your main 3 competencies and what other 5 competencies do you have that you can use in any other job. So there's, you know, a lot of flexibility, and I think we need to be faster in responding, and we need to be better in knowing what's important. And there's no way that we can say for the next 3 years that these are our 3 priorities. This will not work. But what do we need now? What's a window of opportunity? What can we change? What's a quick win? Where are the resources? With whom can we partner? So we are trying, like, there's a lot of communication needed in my organization every day. Every day things come in and we decide, yes, we do this, and no, we won't do that. And you need good finance people who have the finances under control, for example, to do that. But for example, hierarchy is a structure that doesn't work anymore. So, you know, when you think the CEO is on top and then you have team leaders and then you have other leaders, these kind of structures, they will all break down in organizations, because you can't work like that. You need to, like, people who are further down in projects, they need to be able to take the decisions about their budgets. So I'm not informed about details anymore. I just give, budgets to teams, and they do whatever they want with that. I'm not even informed anymore if they want to do it, if they want to use it on another project. It's up to them. They just have to use it more effectively. So I think this is, and I did this degree in organizational development, and I think this is the future. Working in self-organized teams, agile teams. I think this is going to be the future. Sorry, I got carried away.
No, that's okay.
That's a favorite topic of mine.
I'm
the other question was.
I want to take. Let's go about 5 more minutes. We do have another speaker, but
Yep.
Anne, I'd like you to stick around if you can. There are a couple of questions here on the chat. I'm just going to let you guys speak out. Michael, you had the first question about anti-abortion laws in Poland.
Yeah, so what my question is, I understand that Poland is largely a Catholic country, and Catholic ideology usually holds abortion in not a great light. So they think that they're doing the right thing. They think they're adhering to human rights issues according to their own religious ideologies. However, international law dictates something different. How do you approach situations where Islamic or Christian or Jewish tradition or whatever tradition may get in the way of human rights issues?
Yeah, good question. I think for me, it's always about common ground. There is common ground. You just need to talk about beliefs. And I think it's a very personal discussion that I'm also having with lots of members and people. And I'm sure if you dig hard enough, you will find common ground. And this common ground can be love for your family. It can be family. It can be children. It can be different things. And I'm so sure that there is common ground for all issues to be found. We just have to listen carefully and be, I think, reach out to other people and not come with our preset mind. I think we all have our fixed ideas, but the most important thing is to listen and understand what their fears are, and then really discuss it. And I've seen, for example, in Ireland, I mean, even there, like Catholic communities, religious communities also joined in, to really support the campaign. So it is possible.
Okay.
Last questions, I guess, Marty. One was about COVID and the other one is about the media department.
Yeah, McKenna has this question about the media department. I think that's interesting. I think that relates to what you were saying about, you have all kinds of different skill sets, right?
Yeah.
You have IT people and whatever. So McKenna is our media person. And so,
Perfect.
yeah, so working at Amnesty International is not out of the window for her either, is what.
Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, really, videos are, basically right now I'm looking for somebody who can produce videos, and we want to not hire somebody, but really to contract workers to produce content for social media. So we switch. I mean, this is one consequence, for example, of COVID, that we are not, at the moment, we can't mobilize people on the streets. So we focus on online and all the channels we have online. So we invest heavily in social media right now, Facebook, Instagram, everything. And we need people who can produce content. So I think that's something we do right now. And that's one of the consequences of COVID. Another one is, for example, that all of my 43 coworkers now work from home. So within the day, we managed to just set up the office from home, and it works beautifully. Yeah, and I think COVID for us, I mean, we digitalization, is one of these hype words, but really we discovered so many things that you can do without having to meet. You can do big virtual meetings just as easily as meeting in the office. So why even be in the office? I think it's very nice, to see what is possible under COVID. Learned a lot.
Awesome, great.
Yeah.
Any other questions? So I'm gonna give you a big applause. I don't know if that works. Yay. Well, anyways, I don't know. But thank you so much. Thanks, Anne, very much for coming to talk to us. I can see that everybody appreciated it. I hope you'll stick around. We have another speaker.
a little bit. Just let me say thanks for the invitation, Marty. It was a pleasure, and good luck to all of you. And I'm really curious to hear where you will, end up and what jobs you will have. And I'm sure I will, like in 5 years, I will learn from you.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that, so I just want to, I know that some of you are going to be leaving, that you have 11 o'clock classes. So just want to note that.
My 11 o'clock class got canceled, so I'll be sticking around.
Okay. I want to move on to our next speaker, Andrew Scott Dupree. Scott is an international civil society consultant with extensive experience in helping to build and strengthen civil society organizations in South Africa, Brazil, Mexico, Southeast Asia, and the United States. He is passionate about the power of ideas of people. For more than 25 years, he has worked to make organizations responsible to people through strategic planning, fundraising, and program development. His work has resulted in millions of dollars of critical funding from foundations, individuals, companies, and bilateral assistance agencies for local priorities in community development, human rights, and environmental action. Even more important, it has helped set the path of the next generation of I'm going to stumble over that, philanthropic. Somebody say it for me.
Philanthropic?
Yeah, that'll work. Human rights and environmental organizations. He has served as the regional director for Southern African programs, the Cernogis, I even know how to say this, I'm just not. Cernogis Institute. Sorry. And he is the founding director of Connectus, human rights organization in Sao Paulo, Brazil. He has also served as the alliance coordinator for Global Green Grants Funds in Colorado, and is currently working with Fossil in Mexico. It's mostly Baja California, is that right?
Nope, it's national.
It is, okay. So great, so let's welcome Scott Dupree. He goes by Scott. It's Andrew Scott Dupree, but he goes by Scott. So let's welcome Scott. If you have a few comments. I'm particularly interested in, just to get you started, I'm particularly interested in your journey from St. John's. He was a participant in the St. John's Great Books program. And I believe it was after that that you joined the Peace Corps, is that correct? So I'm particularly interested in your journey from the Peace Corps to the EPA to what you do now.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Professor Witzer. So it's wonderful to be here speaking with you, and back on Zoom. I also teach a Master's in Development course at Regis. And it's a global classroom, so Zoom should be normal for me, although I'm feeling amazed just looking at the different pictures. And I have to say, Lily, your picture of the dog has made my day. Thank you. Super. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a topic that is a little difficult. Eclectic career development, right? How you make your career reflect you. So it's a little bit different than sort of deciding I want to go into being a doctor and then setting yourself on a career path. And it's probably not for everybody. But I think it's what my path has been. So I'm going to walk you through that path very quickly and or maybe not so quickly, and see where that takes us. And I look forward to talking about it. But really the idea I want to get across is kind of thinking about your career as just another side of you. How you get a career that just reflects who you are. I hope I can get there. So great. Professor Witzer mentioned how my undergraduate was at St. John's College. It's a great books program. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but basically you spend 4 years learning ancient Greek and reading philosophers and studying math from Euclid. And you get a liberal arts degree that you can say doesn't actually say that you are much embedded in the world, the current world, the way it is. So that's where I came out of. I immediately joined the Peace Corps, where I went for 3 years to teach science in Botswana. That's in the center of Southern Africa. That was unexpectedly life-changing for me, because, you know, for many reasons, but I just want to highlight one, that when I was in the Peace Corps, I noticed, you know, in my village, everyone read Drum magazine. And even though they didn't have running water, what people wanted were washing machines. Even though they didn't have much money, right, you could see that they were trying to follow all of the styles that were communicated to them through this magazine. My students all wanted that. That was their dream. But it was kind of a dream of something so far away. And what I began to realize is that they were undervaluing themselves. They wanted the washing machine, but they didn't realize, in my mind, how amazing life was when older people didn't retire, but sort of became the child caregivers in their family. So that there was a social system that worked so much better than the social system that I came from. That's one example, but there were many examples in which life was so much better. Sometimes I like to say that the time for me in the Peace Corps was the time that I discovered that, hey, I like being a human being. Being a human being is great, right? People took the time to greet each other in the mornings. They stopped to say hi. I came from California, right? In California, here's how we said hi. We just did this. And then we walked on, right? I don't know if you saw that, right? Let me do it again. We just did this. And then we walked on, right? That was hi. That was all the moment that we could give to each other to say, I acknowledge your existence and being. That was it. No one stopped to say, hi, how are you? And yet in my village, it was insulting if you didn't stop and you said the greetings and you asked people how you were. And what I began to realize is that for some reason, people really cared how I was, right? That was new to me. And I began to say, man, it is really amazing to be a human being. But what is this problem we have in the world where everything about what people want to be and about what they expect and all of our aspirations are tied up in this one-way conversation? Oh, what you need is a washing machine. Oh, what you need is a Mercedes-Benz. Oh, what you need is the bandana and the hoodie, right? All of those things were the continual barrage of communications that people were getting. That's where their aspirations were built. And so I didn't know what this meant, but I started to ask myself, that's really something that I would like to spend my life changing. How do we change that one-way communication dynamic, right? And I wasn't worried about how to make these people better off. I was thinking about my friends in California who were still going like this all day long to each other. And I was thinking, how could we start to learn from each other? Because really everything that it takes to be a great human being, we already have it in the world, but we aren't learning from each other. We have this one-way Western dialogue, and it just doesn't work. Look, if you don't get that, that's okay. That's what I learned, though. That's what I learned coming out of the Peace Corps. And you know, then I took off and I traveled the world for a year. I went to 40 countries and and up rivers and hitchhiked, and sometimes I flew planes, and then I came back to the United States and I said, uh-oh, uh-oh, now what do I do, right? I sort of did all that, now what do I do? One of the nice things about Peace Corps is that you get something called non-competitive eligibility, which means that you can apply for any federal job and they have to move you to the top of the priority list, basically. They don't have to interview other people and they can hire you right away. So I said, okay, I don't know what I want to do now, but maybe I'll just take advantage of this. I went to Washington, and within a week, I had a job as a toxic chemical specialist at the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C. On a personal note, a wonderful Canadian I'd known in the Peace Corps was there, and we started dating, life was good, and I started at the EPA. It wasn't the career path for me, right? And that's one of the things that we have to know. How do you know when you're not doing the right thing, right? Everything was good. I was getting a paycheck. I was responsible for regulating toxic chemicals in the US. I was coordinating these studies across chemicals. And I think I was doing a good job. That is, people kept saying to me in the hallways, oh my God, did you know you're going to be the deputy administrator of the Office for Toxic Substances someday? You're on that path. And I was like, deputy administrator for the Office of Toxic Substances at the Environmental Protection Agency. Nope, doesn't do anything for me. Don't know why I'm headed there. And so after bringing the second chemical ever to go through the regulatory process, which, if you care, is methylene chloride used in paint stripping. No, I'm sorry, I'm not even remembering properly. It was acrylamide used in sewer grouting. So that was great. I got that there, and I went into my boss's office and I said, I quit. And he said, what? How can you quit? What do you mean? Why are you quitting, right? And I said, this just isn't for me. Literally, it was so boring. I would go into the office and there was this one guy who knew how many seconds there were until he retired, right? I just didn't expect that. I didn't expect that. I didn't want that. And it had nothing to do with this idea of changing the world, right? Changing the way we think about each other. And I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I knew that this wasn't it. But I did get one really great thing out of the Office of Toxic Substances at the Environmental Protection Agency, which is that one day, the only person in the agency I found to have any energy and to be exciting, he came into my office and said, you know, it took 20 years for us to regulate asbestos. That was the first chemical the office had ever regulated. And he said, you know, there are 2 warehouses full of industry submissions to say why we shouldn't regulate asbestos. I said, oh, yeah, that's amazing, right? And he said, but do you know how many submissions came from citizens, from civil society? And I said, no, I imagine another warehouse. He said, no. And he walked into my office, and there pulled out the file cabinet, bottom drawer, and pulled out 2 files, right? 2 files, the thickness of, if you can see my video, between my fingers. And he said, this is all the submissions we got from citizens groups to regulate asbestos, right? But asbestos has killed hundreds of thousands of people over the years, and that's it, right? It's destroyed whole communities, and that's it. And he said, yep, that's the power gap. People don't know how to act. They don't know how to change things. And he said, that's why I go from community to community and try to help them figure out how to change things. Very interesting, I said. Now I had 2 pieces. One, I wanted to change the one-way communication. And two, part of the problem with the one-way communication was this power gap. And you could do something about this power gap. You could actually begin to change it. All right, I had those two pieces. At this point, and since all of you guys are interested in international work, right? One of the interesting things in my story is I didn't even know you could study international politics or international studies or anthropology in university, right? I went to a liberal arts school. We didn't talk about that. But it turned out that my girlfriend, who we broke up right after this, but my girlfriend worked for an amazing human rights center that worked on Guatemalan rights in DC. All she had was a bachelor's degree in international affairs. And she was working in this great job, and I loved what they did. And so I had another piece. And I said, that's what I want to do. I want to take what I've learned, I want to take what I want to do, and I want to do that. I want to work in an organization like she does. I applied to universities. No, I applied to a university for a master's degree. They accepted me. I went, I did a master's in international affairs. The university was Columbia in New York. After 2 years there, I did, oh, by the way, since I heard people talking about internships, I did an internship at an organization called the Rainforest Alliance in New York City. I organized an international conference on the search for solutions to the rainforest at the Natural History Museum in New York. And then I ended up getting a job as a fundraising assistant at a little strange organization in New York called the Synergos Institute. I did that for 2 years. And then once again, I quit, right? You're probably noticing a theme. How to build a career by quitting. But I knew that I wanted 2 years in fundraising. I didn't want to become a fundraiser. I wanted to learn fundraising because I thought it was important for what I needed to do. So I quit. And they said, what? How can you quit? And I said, well, this is great, but I want to do more. And they said, okay. Luckily, because of that job, Gratz Michel in Mozambique, who had just started the nation's first community foundation, found out that I'd quit. And she grabbed me up and said, come work in Mozambique, developing my organization for a year. So I did that. I went to Mozambique and developed the first community foundation in Mozambique. Great opportunity. I got the opportunity because I never thought of my job as limiting, right? I thought of my job as how you build, how you network, how I'm building towards what I want to do. So now all of a sudden, right, I'm beginning to learn about how do you build the funding to fund people to do what they want to do. Do you get how this is the first piece of being able to do this conversation building I wanted to do that I learned in the Peace Corps, right? People should have the funding they need to do their own priorities. And they should be able to set their own priorities. It was absolutely amazing. My first experience in philanthropy, I worked as organizational development, so I helped to fire the program director, hire a new program director, strengthen the funding sources for the foundation, et cetera, et cetera. And after a year, said to Gratz, this was great, this was wonderful. Okay, so I'm done. She said, what? No, you have to stay for longer. I said, no, look, we've done what we set out to do. We've put your organization where it needs to be. And those folks at Synergos came back and said, we would like you now to be our regional director for Southern Africa. So all of a sudden, I'm beginning to do what I wanted to do, right? I'm starting to build foundations now all across Southern Africa. So in 13 countries of Southern Africa, I helped to build over 26 foundations, community foundations, grassroots foundations, existing foundations, making them stronger. I created the first international network of foundations in Southern Africa. And I did this for 10 years out of New York. I was the regional director for Southern Africa. Amazing job. And at a certain point, I realized once again that I had learned what I wanted out of the job. But I still hadn't come down to this point of changing that dialogue. And that's when a good friend called me on the phone and said, you know, that organization we always talked about founding, that organization that would build the Southern voice, Southern meaning Global South? I said, yeah. He said, well, I got $1 million. Let's do it now. This was a friend, by the way, I'd met just like you guys are meeting each other. I met him at Columbia. He was from Brazil. We were studying together. We used to sit up till 3 in the morning talking about how to change the world. And I never expected that 10 years later, he'd call me on the phone and say, let's do it now, right? But that was a relationship I built then, just like you guys are building relationships now. It wasn't something that I had to struggle with, but I said, okay, and went down, and for 5 amazing years with my friend from Brazil, we built a new international human rights organization, which you just heard from Amnesty, but our objective was sort of an anti-Amnesty objective. We felt that there needed to be a stronger Southern voice on human rights. You see it, the conversation, it's coming back, right? We wanted to strengthen the role of Southern organizations in human rights. So that organization was amazing, is amazing, still continues today. Some of the amazing things we did, we created the first network of Southern human rights professors and a journal, International Journal on Human Rights, which is now in its 28th edition, called SOUR. We began to advocate at the UN for Southern human rights organizations. We fought Human Rights Watch, a little bit Amnesty, a little bit the other international human rights organizations to say there has to be a space for Southern human rights activists. And then after 5 years, I realized this was an amazing organization. But what was I, an American, doing in an organization that's promoting the Southern voice? Because it was folks from the Global South, and they were doing they were doing it. So once again, you see the theme coming back? I quit. And Oscar, my friend from Brazil, and everyone said, what, how can you quit? And I said, well, because I will never be an authentic Southern voice. And that wasn't my role. I wanted to strengthen the Southern voice. I didn't want to be the Southern voice. And this has been amazing. But now that it's working, it's time for me to go. So I left, came to Denver, did my PhD in international affairs at DU, and began what I wanted as the new part of my career, which is I spend a third of my time teaching classes. I spend a third of my time working to do what I've always done, which is to build other organizations, to strengthen other people's voices around the world. Marty mentioned one, the Action and Solidarity Fund. I like to think of that one as like my baby because it's an amazing organization that across Mexico is the first organization to support grassroots groups. Supports over 300 a year all across the country, indigenous peoples groups, human rights groups, women's groups, community groups of all kinds. And it's building the first conversation in Mexico to say, we have to do philanthropy differently. At the same time, I continue to work in Southeast Asia, where I'm a fellow at the Samdana Institute. I continue to work in Africa with some of the foundations I help to build, and sometimes with international human rights organizations, taking different contracts. So I just got off the phone before this with a research project on the strategic plan for the future of a funders network for Indigenous peoples. And that's my consultancy work. And then the other third of the time I spend, cough, cough, writing, because I write, but sometimes I don't write so well. So that's it. That's my third career. And I guess, you know, I challenge you, I don't think this is for everybody, right? There's no job security in what I do. Nobody pays my health insurance. And yet everything I do is what I want to do. And when I work with organizations, I'm working with organizations because I love them. Is that a career path for everybody? I doubt it. But that's been my career path.
Thank you, Scott. Actually, I think there's some overlap in that last bit that you said with what Annemarie was saying is, and I just, you know, I know Annemarie personally from the United Nations, and I know what she went through, but what is just following your heart, right? Just following what you want to do. I wanted to go back. I wanted to ask you about, I think we talked about last night, I think it was, about the Peace Corps and how that kind of primed you to just go anywhere. So, I mean, do you recommend the Peace Corps as a path? Or is that just, again, something that's specific to certain people?
Peace Corps was an incredible luxury in the sense that I was able to spend 3 years learning another language, learning another culture. As I said, I learned that I liked being a human being. Some very basic things. Is it for everybody? I don't know. And it depends on where you want your career to go. But yes, if you can do it and you can spend that time, do it, right? It's not a matter of, it's a matter of getting yourself out of your comfort zone, going somewhere where the very basic stuff is different. And yes, you have a job to do. I would say a third of the Peace Corps volunteers, in my experience, go because they think they have the answer, some solution. They're going to go help. I didn't go for that reason. And I respect that reason. But I think part of the problem is we don't have the answer. I work with tons of organizations at the Posner Center, which if you don't know, you should know. The Posner Center is where international organizations, civil society organizations in Denver hang out and do their stuff. And, you know, I would say, I'm not going to speak about anyone in particular, but I would say that a good half of them really worry me because they're promoting that one-way conversation. We have the answer and we're going to impose our answer. If you don't trust me on that, right? One of the things joining the Peace Corps can help you is to really experience it firsthand. We don't have the answer for other people's problems. Other people have the answer to their problems. How can we be helpful? How do we get there? There was one day where International Women's Day, and I told this story at Posner. There was about 200 people in the room about how women in Zimbabwe decided they wanted to stop these organizations coming from outside telling them what to do. And so they decided to fund their own, create their own foundation to fund their own work, right? So they could be their own donors and support their own priorities. And all of these people from the Posner Center, all who work in international development, came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, so you're just saying that we can't have the solution, that we can't do what we want to do, right?" And it's not that. It's not that, right? If you really want to make a difference internationally, how are you able to respect both sides, right? How are you able to know some things and put your knowledge to work for others without telling them what to do? It's a really delicate balance, right? And if you want to be effective internationally, whether you want to be a diplomat or work in a company or work in civil society like I do, the question of that balance, right, is going to make you effective or not effective. You can develop all the skills you want, but once you start imposing things on other people, if you're not able to respect that a peasant in Guatemala, right, knows as much about what they should be doing in the future as you do, right? If that doesn't even make sense to you, right, then you haven't learned that balance yet. And Peace Corps is great for learning that balance.
Right. I have a question here from Michael. Which organizations work to build grassroots NGOs? So I guess, can you name a few organizations that work to do the kind of work that you're doing besides civil society transitions, obviously, your own organization?
So this concept of supporting development, human rights, environment from the bottom up is one that has been rapidly developing over the last 20 years. In the United States, there's an organization called Grassroots International, which does nothing but supports grassroots organizations. If you look at foundations in Colorado, you will find a healthy group, about 10 foundations that are supporting grassroots community action. Organizations like the Denver Foundation support grassroots organizations. Community foundations in general are beginning to support more grassroots organizations, and there are 5,000 community foundations in the United States. Every community has one. The Chinook Fund here in Denver is an amazing organization that was set up to do nothing but support marginalized grassroots communities across Colorado. Those are the names of a couple. On the international level, Grassroots International, of course, a good number of the foundations, and even organizations like Annemarie's, Amnesty, right? They have learned in the last 20 years, and I heard some of it in Amnesty's, in the way Annemarie was speaking, that they have to move from this hierarchical, as she called it, top-down model, to a model which actually supports what people want to do, rather than what the organization leaders think people should do. So there has actually been this change, right? And many people have started to change organizations, from Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, some of the slower to change, right, are the environmental organizations, but they also are changing. 10 years ago, I went, Conservation International, I went to talk to them about how they are supporting indigenous people in the Amazon. So Conservation International has the contract to manage large swaths of the Amazon from the Brazilian government. And someone at Conservation International said, oh, there aren't any indigenous people there. No, there aren't any indigenous people there. They weren't even trying, right? So it's not a matter of what organizations do or don't. It's a matter of asking the right questions. If you're going to work for an organization that's just applying a top-down policy model, as Conservation International was, it is not one of those. But I'm not going to make a blanket statement to say that Conservation International isn't. But you have Conservation International, Nature Conservancy, the Sierra Club. All of them have been struggling with this because there have been organizations and peoples that are pushing back. You're managing us without our input, right? One of the classes I teach at Regis is participatory planning. It's how do you actually work with communities to get their input to build them into the leadership. And so in that way, yes, there are many organizations that work with grassroots organizations. I named a few. All organizations, right, at least in civil society and in the international governmental field, should be working with civil society. And right now at the UN, it's the civil society forums that are one of the most influential that are constantly pushing to have treaties improved. We got the Indigenous Peoples Treaty because of a forum on Indigenous peoples, civil society groups that pushed for it. So we're in a place where there's a lot of possibility. to support grassroots. I tend to focus, that's what I love, so that's where I'm focused. But in any work that you do, in any organization, it's one of the questions you want to ask them in an interview. How do you set priorities? How do you get participation? How do you ask people?
I want to just something I heard what you were saying, and with the overlap with Annemarie was saying, is you were saying that there's this organizational shift, kind of more of a bottom up than top down. And I kind of want to overlap that with the question of, does that offer more opportunities for our undergrad students here? Or what can students do to get involved in these kind of organizations?
Okay, two sides. Yes, I meant it to say that there's a lot of opportunities now that weren't there 20 years ago. So from an opportunity standpoint, one of the students that was in my participatory planning class is now heading the Denver Transportation Board, right? So he is actually trying to incorporate grassroots voices into how we do transportation in Colorado. You will find every organization has possibilities now. The question is the challenge, right? And this is one of the reasons why on a job interview or an internship interview or even when you're doing your research, your questions back are just as important as being prepared for the interview questions that you get. And I would say that from my point of view, this is an interview question I would always ask. How do you get participation? How do you get feedback for your programs? Is there leadership from the communities that this program is affecting? And if someone who I'm applying with a job or who I'm working on a contract with can't answer that question, I won't work with them, because the challenge is that there is a lot of fake participation going on. There's a lot of people who say, there's a lot of programs that say they get participation, but they don't. And I could tell a great story about that, but I'm looking at the time, so I won't. As far as getting involved here, I named one organization, the Chinook Fund. They're a Posner. Denver Foundation would have interesting internships, but even some of the government or even corporate internships. We have companies in Boulder, if you're interested in working internationally, that are expanding internationally that have exactly this challenge. Then there's the other side of that. One of the big international fields and companies that we have are mining companies. But I wouldn't, no, if you're interested in this from a private point of view, actually getting a job with or getting an internship with, say, Newmont Mining, which used to be headquartered here, would be very, very interesting to see how they do it. But that would be one of the examples of not doing it.
I had one more question, but I'm gonna put it up. Do any of you guys have any questions?
I do have a question,
Sure.
but it's unrelated to these organizations. It was a question about career development. So similar to you, I was in a position where it's very technical, and I wanted to leave away from that and be able to branch out. So that's why I'm going back to school. I was wondering if there was something from your past positions or schooling that made you, qualified for your first supervisory managerial position. If you would have any tips or help with that.
Yeah, so you just heard from a terrific manager, and I would say that probably I've always been underqualified for my managerial positions. but I haven't viewed them as a technical challenge, right? So one of the things about managerial positions is you're going to have to answer the very straightforward questions. How many people have you managed? What is your human resource policy? How do you deal with sexual harassment? There's all those sorts of questions. And all those sorts of questions, you know, I don't have the right answers. And I never have had the right answers because I haven't known. That hasn't been the part of management that's interested me. And so there's nothing better than either working your way up into greater and greater management positions and learning as you go along on that, or taking management courses that give you at least the basis for the answers. But you started your question by asking, you know, by saying as a technical expertise or a technical skill. And my own perspective is management is not a technical skill. It's a people skill. I'm not sure how you learn that. And I'm not even sure I know that or am qualified to tell you how to know that, right? Because it really has to do with good people skills. Some of that you can learn, and some, you know, I know database programmers, and they should be database programmers because that's where they excel. But management is really about people skills. One of the things I will put in a plug for is participatory planning, right? Which there are skills for how to get people engaged in all levels of management. There are skills for that. It's not just about your human resource policy and your sexual harassment policy and how you manage the people right under you. It's also about how you do strategic planning in such a way that the planning involves everyone's voices. And, you know, you can learn about that. Come take my participatory planning class, for example. There are things to learn about that. There are methods and ways to get good at that.
So I'd kind of like to pick up on that because I think, and I'm not sure, Scott, you tuned in a little late, so I don't know if you, Annemarie was kind of posed the question, or I don't know, I don't remember how the question was asked, but her response was is that it really doesn't matter that you're, that first of all technical skills matter, and so that's important. And she was more, would she say, guys, that grades didn't matter as much as your passion or your, you know, desire to work in there? Yeah. You have any comments on that?
Just to say I agree. You know, when you're playing the school game, grades matter. And I won't undermine that. It's always been my perspective that grades didn't matter to me. That's just me.
Yeah, but you always got A's, so yeah, it didn't matter.
Well, not always. I failed primary school. So no, but yeah, no, in the real world, right, when you're coming down to it, you will meet people for whom it does continue to matter. And you have to deal with all kinds of people, right? I once applied for a job. I didn't want it, but I didn't know I didn't want it, doing the newsletter for the World Bank. And when I went in to apply for the job, the guy sat down behind this very, very oppressive desk, and he said to me, "Oh, I see that you went to St. John's College." And I said, yeah. And he said, "Well, I'm told that's a very good college. And that's important because we only hire people from the best colleges." And my eyes, you know, they went as wide as quarters. And first of all, I never heard anyone describe St. John's as a very good college before. So that was just new to me. But second of all, I was like, why would I want to work in this place? What are the values of these people? You know, I knew I was getting into it doing the newsletter for the World Bank, but really, right? That's why I say, I can't emphasize this enough, whether you're applying for an internship or a job, your questions are more important than their questions. that you go in knowing what you want to know is more important than that you can answer all their questions in the way that they'll hire you. And you know what? If you go in asking real questions and they don't like your real questions, it's good because that job wasn't for you, right? You need to make a match between what you want and what they offer. And when that match is there, everybody wins because they're getting someone, yes, with the technical skills, but also with the values that matches their organization. And that's the win-win solution. So, you know, I just come back to, yes, there's going to be people for whom grades matter, for whom the importance, the name of your college matters, for whom what, you know, whether you are on the rowing club matters. But in the end, what matters, right, is that you find those jobs, right, those internships that match what you want to learn with who you are now, that you bring something and that they bring something for you. That's why if I leave you with nothing else, right, it's this: never go to an interview without knowing what you want to know from them. Just don't. It's not worth it.
Awesome. I think that's great advice. And I think I really like the you know, that come prepared with your own questions. And I know that every job that I've ever had that I really liked was that right fit. You know, it fit. The interview, I mean, some of my best jobs, I knew I had the job before I even entered the interview. Kind of those things. I just knew it was the right fit. Okay, any other questions? I know we're running a little short on time here, but does anybody else have any questions? No?
I have one real quick. I know with when it comes to the Peace Corps, a lot of times you aren't allowed to do certain jobs that have like security clearances and all that. Is that rumor? Is that true? And has that affected your career at all?
In other words, that after you've been in the Peace Corps, you can't get the security clearance?
Yeah, as far as I'm tracking, if you've done 4 years in the Peace Corps, that you aren't allowed to get a security clearance with some government agencies or most government agencies. I don't know if that's a rumor, if that's true, and if it is true, has that affected you at all?
It would seem to me that if there is truth to that, it's probably in a very, very, very small sector of jobs, but I don't know enough to comment. In fact, for me, it's been nothing but a leg up. And actually, I have to admit, Marty said talk about Peace Corps. I don't like presenting myself as an ex-Peace Corps volunteer because honestly, people hear crazy do-gooder who plays the guitar and thinks they can change the world. And I don't want that to be people's first perspective of me. But I will give you two pieces about the Peace Corps. One is that you never know whether the job itself is going to work or not. I was very lucky. They put me as a science teacher. The job was this much of my challenge, very small. I went, taught science, did what I needed to do. And that was good because what I really wanted was the stuff that went beyond my job. But other people get, you know, I know people who've gone and they're all of a sudden the vice president of a bank in Guinea. Or people who've gone and they're stuck in the middle of nowhere with a shovel and told to start an agricultural program, right? It's very, very varied, right? So the one challenge is you really never know whether that part's going to be work or not. But as for the post part, the only challenge I've ever had that I've known of telling people that I was in the Peace Corps was I once didn't get on jury duty in New York because the lawyer, the opposing lawyer said, "Oh, that means you've seen real poverty." And I was like, "Look, I live in New York. What do you mean I've seen real poverty? See it everywhere here." And he said, "No, you've seen real poverty. You're never going to get my client the millions and millions of dollars my client wants." I was like, "Sure, I'll be open-minded, but but you know, you can't help it once you've done something like that, people see you within a certain box. But that's true whatever career you have. I see accountants in a certain box. I see government workers in a certain box. And, you know, the Newmont mine workers, the Newmont mine executives, I see them in another box. So, you know, that's just part of life. But no, I've never had, but it's the type of jobs I apply. I've never had any job that I've applied for where having the time in the Peace Corps wasn't actually seen as at least a conversation starter and not a security clearance problem.
Thank you very much.
I have a question.
Esther, yeah.
So you spoke a lot about, you know, staying in a certain job for maybe like a year or two and really getting some particular skills and then leaving. I'm wondering how you would advise to discern between whether or not a job is going to actually be helpful for your future and whether it's worth the, you know, the monotony of that particular position. Like, for example, if there's like Department of State passport specialist, you've literally stamped passports, but then you've worked for the Department of State, you know? So yeah, I'd love your feedback on that.
Well, that's a little bit why I bothered to tell the story of my time at the EPA. Great job. But yes, the culture of the organization was very similar to the monotony you just described, right? And it wasn't leading me anywhere. But I only knew that after being there for 3 months. That was my problem. That's because I just needed a job and I didn't ask the right questions going in. Mm-hmm. That's why, you know, kind of knowing what you want out of your job, whether you want to work there for 20 years or 2 years, that's important going in. Right. Sometimes it just feels like I'll take whatever I can get. And, right. You know, I've heard people, I've had staff apply for jobs that say, oh, but I can do anything. Oh, but I can learn that. Oh, but no, I just need a job. I can do anything. That's never, in my opinion, a very good strategy in a job interview, because you're not making the match, right? So, but sticking very specifically with the question, I learned something from doing the monotonous job.
Yeah.
I learned something from doing the wrong job, and it redirected my life. After that, I was saying, okay, no, never again. Now I'm looking for the right job. And that's why when I went in for the World Bank thing, I already knew, you know, I listened I knew that wasn't the job for me when after I walked in there, because I was looking for the right job. Now, the positive content, right? How do you move from the negative, I know what I don't want, to the positive, I know what I do want? Well, it depends on you, right? I knew a woman once, and she had one particular programming skill, and she just wanted a job where she would be doing that programming all day long. She wanted it to pay her well and blah, blah, blah. She knew exactly what she wanted, right? Exactly what her skill was and exactly what she wanted. And she held out until she got that. And that's fine. That was her strategy. But if you're like me, I can't put into words what my strategy at every point was, right? That's why I described for you what I learned about what was motivating me. And it's that motivation. So for me, it was that conversation. How do I make the conversation 2 ways? I began to put something concrete on that. Oh, it has to do with the power gap. Oh, I don't want to work for a corporation, and I don't want to work for government, because I do want to work for a civil society organization, because that's where the power gap is. So how do I build those things? How do I strengthen that? But I only got there through experience, right? And sorry, but you guys are at the beginning of that great path, right? What you're gonna learn things that are suffering, that are monotonous, that were a wrong path. But to give yourself that space to say, what did I learn from this? It doesn't work at the EPA. It was like, government job, nope. Nope, that wasn't it. Oh, civil society? Yes, right? Luckily, I had the space to learn from that. I didn't have a mortgage, 3 kids, and a house in the suburbs. So, you know, I didn't have those parameters, right? But sometimes because of our lives, we don't listen to those voices and we don't take them seriously. We've learned something, but we don't actually benefit from it. So the point is always, always, when you're in a job search or beginning to think about your job, to give yourself that space to back off and say, what are my positive objectives, right? My positive objective was, I want to change the power gap. I want to do something on that, right? I don't know how. I don't know where. I don't know what organization, right? There can be many that fit within that, but I knew that. And so that's what got me there. So there's two pieces. What are your negatives? I won't work for this, right? And make sure your list of negatives isn't so long that it could choke a horse. And then come back to the other side. Do I know? What do I positively know? And give yourself the space to not know everything, right? That's part of going into something new, is you're going to learn something. I didn't know the EPA was going to be a disaster for me. but luckily I have the space to learn that.
Awesome, thank you. Do we have any other questions? Great, good, because we're kind of short on time. Scott, thank you very much for your insights. Very much appreciated. Looking for that little hand clap thing here. There we go. So good job. And thank you everybody for participating. I think that Hamilton wanted to say a few things. Is that right, Hamilton?
Oh, just very briefly, Martin, I wanted to thank you for putting together this event and for your generosity in opening up to all of the international studies students. I saw we actually had a few alumni on the call as well, so that was really great. Thanks to Annemarie and to Scott for sharing their wisdom and their insights. There was a lot of great things said. Thank you also for recording the session, so students who may have missed it or want to go back and listen to something again, I'll be posting a link or working with you to post a link so students can do that. And then finally, just want to thank the students for participating and all their great questions today. It was really a useful session, so thanks everyone.
Great. So thank you everybody. Sorry we went over quite a bit over time for our class, but that's okay, and thanks for hanging in there. I appreciate it. Same as Hamilton said, I appreciate the speakers. I think there were some great insights, and I think you guys had some great questions. So yeah, thanks. You're dismissed. And I will catch up with most of you on Tuesday. All right.
Have a good weekend.
You too.
Hey, Martin, I sent you an email.
Just a second. Wait, I gotta stop.
Oh.